So this chapter, it's chapter 19, and it's all about the digestive system. So here are the different... So I am going to make a video of the digestive system chapter. This is chapter 19. These are the main topics that we're going to cover. Let's see. I'm using a different program because the microphone that I used before doesn't work quite so well. So let's try this. So the organs of the digestive tract, we went over a lot of this in lab. So the main big points besides learning the organs is to know that the GI tract is the whole tube that's going to start at the mouth and go down to the anus. The accessory organs are things that are going to dump into the digestive tract. So they're the tongue, the teeth, the salivary glands, which are going to help digest the food before it gets to the tract. The liver, which is going to secrete bile, the gallbladder, which will also secrete bile, and the pancreas, which will secrete digestive enzymes so that you're going to be able to digest your food. So the mouth is the oral cavity. We're going to start at the top and we're going to work our way through, and we'll go through all of these different parts. So there are 6 main functions of the digestive system, and they totally make sense. So ingestion is the first process. So ingestion is when we're going to, whoops, wait a minute, sorry, trying to figure out. Ingestion is going to be how we're going to take food in to the mouth, so we ingest it. Okay, secretion is going to be involved. So secretion is how things get from different glands into the GI tract. So water, acid buffers, enzymes, how they get in, we're going to secrete them. The movement of the GI tract is very important for the digestion of food. So mixing is how we're going to churn it. We're going to mix it all up, and then we're going to propel it through, or we're going to use propulsion to move it through. Okay, digestion is how we're going to break it down. So there can be mechanical and chemical digestion. So mechanical is like what your teeth do. Chemical digestion is what the enzymes are going to do. Absorption is how the nutrients are going to get from the GI tract into your blood and into the lymph. And then defecation is how we're going to get rid of the waste from the GI tract. So here's a cadaver picture. So a picture of a cadaver. So here's the diaphragm. Okay, stomach is underneath the liver. So here's the liver and the right and the left lobes of the liver. The gallbladder is underneath the liver. The ascending colon is over here. So stomach. Transverse colon is going to travel across. Descending, so the colon will go up like this, over. So it'll go like this, and then down. The 3 parts of the small intestines are the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. So let's see. I think we got most of what's on there right now. So the idea is that the way the layers, there are 4 layers that are going to be found in all of the organs in the GI tract. Okay, so if we start at the inside and we work our way out, the innermost layer is going to be the mucosa. So the mucosa is what's going to touch the food. So if I draw a circle, okay, so this is a cross-section through GI tract. So this is where the food would be. Okay, so this first layer right here that the food is going to touch, that's the mucosa. So that's the mucosa. The submucosa would be underneath of it. Okay, so let's pick another color. Submucosa is submucosa is underneath, so it's going to be in this space in here. Submucosa is going to be areolar tissue. There's going to be nerves, blood vessels in there. Okay, so submucosa. The muscularis is going to be the muscle layer, so that's going to be underneath. Okay, usually there's 2 layers of muscle, except for in the stomach. Okay, so the muscle's going to mix the food up. And then the outermost layer, that's the serosa. Okay, so the serosa will be the outside layer, so this red. Okay, all of the organs, well, not all of the organs, but the membrane that covers the majority of the organs in the abdominal cavity is called the peritoneum. and that's the largest serous membrane in your body. You should remember what a serous membrane does. So it secretes serous fluid. The idea behind serous fluid is that it's going to reduce friction, so you don't feel those organs moving around inside your body. So mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and serosa. That's the order of all the layers, and that's a common theme from the mouth all the way down to the anus. Okay, so here's the picture from the book that's got a lot on it. So serosa is the outside layer. Okay, it has epithelial tissue, it has areolar tissue, so it's this region right in here. Okay, it goes all the way around. Okay, then here's the muscularis. Muscularis in general has two muscle layers. One is circular, so one is going around, and then there's a longitudinal one that's going long ways. So the circular muscle is going to squeeze your food. The longitudinal muscle is going to push it down. So we're going to churn and constrict. Okay, here's the mucosa. Submucosa is underneath of that. Okay, and then we have the mucosa, which is the innermost layer. You can see how complex it all is. Here's mesentery, which is going to be like on the outside. That's like the omentum. It's just tissue holding it all together. There are nerves in there. The nerves are part of this thing called the enteric nervous system. There's glands in there that secretions are going to come from. So there's just a lot going on. Okay. Whoops, why? Oh, I can't get it to. Okay, so the GI tract and the omentum. Okay, so if we look at the omentums, the greater omentum is the fatty apron, and we've talked about that before in lab. We looked at it on the cat. It attaches to the transverse colon, and it comes down over all the abdominal organs. In this picture, it's pulled up. Okay, so it's like reflected. And then in here, you can maybe see, you can't see the lesser omentum, but you can see the mesentery. Okay, so the mesentery is going to be that tissue that's in between the small intestines. There's also tissue in between the parts of the colon, and that's called the mesocolon. So mesocolon. So we'll start at the mouth and we'll work our way down. So the mouth is formed by the cheeks, the hard and soft palate, the lips, and the tongue. Its function is mechanical digestion. So the idea is going to be that we're going to break the food down. We're going to break the food down into smaller pieces. And when we break it down into smaller pieces, it's going to be easier to digest, just like when we smashed up the cracker. Okay, so the tongue is the floor of the oral cavity. It's a skeletal muscle. It's covered with mucous membrane. It has papillae on it. Some of the papillae have taste buds. Some of the glands in the tongue secrete an enzyme called lingual lipase. Okay, so all enzymes end in ASE. Okay, and usually the first part kind of gives you a hint as to what they break down or what they build. Okay, so lingual lipase is an enzyme that comes from beneath the tongue or from the tongue, which breaks down lipids. Okay, it starts working once it gets into the stomach. Okay, now the salivary glands are going to dump their secretions into the oral cavity. So 3 pairs of salivary glands, so parotid, submandibular, and sublingual. We looked at those in lab. Okay, so the saliva actually contains another enzyme. It's called salivary amylase. Salivary amylase is going to start breaking down complex carbohydrates. Okay, so amylase is always going to break down carbohydrates. So salivation is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, and we've talked about that before. Okay, so the mouth contains the teeth. Okay, and the teeth project into the mouth. They're going to be adapted for mechanical digestion, so they're there to help us break up the food. The typical tooth consists of 3 principal regions: the crown, the root, and the neck. Okay, the teeth are composed primarily of this chemical called dentin, and the dentin is covered by enamel. Enamel is the hardest substance that's found in your body. Humans typically have two sets of teeth. Deciduous teeth are our baby teeth, and then our permanent teeth are what we call our adult teeth. Mastication occurs when we chew our food up, and what it does is it mixes it with the saliva, and it shapes it into a ball that we're going to be able to swallow, and that ball is called a bolus. Okay, so when you look at your mouth, well, I think we've looked at this a bunch of times. Gingiva are the gums. Okay, the palatine tonsils we've talked about. So incisors are the front teeth. The cuspids are the cuspid are the canines. Okay, premolars and then molars. Okay, you guys will spend a lot of time on all that. Okay, so here's a picture of the parts of the tooth. So enamel, so that's the hardest surface. Then the dentin. Okay, the gingiva are the gums. Okay, then we'll have the pulp. It's found in the pulp cavity. So in the pulp, that's where we're going to have the blood vessels and the nerves, and some lymph, probably. Okay, cementum is going to be where the tooth attaches with the periodontal ligament to the bone. Okay, so the cementum is going to help keep it all anchored in there. At the roots of the tooth, there's a little hole, the apical foramen. Okay, alveolar bone is where the teeth are going to be in there. So, and then the canal is where the pulp continues down into the root. So on the root, okay, the neck, and then the crown. So the crown is exposed from the gum, the neck is kind of within the gum, and then the root is down into the bone. Okay, so here's a chart with, whoops, it's got the wrong heading on it, but, so these are the teeth. So here's deciduous teeth, their names and when they emerge, typically, and then the permanent teeth and their names and how they emerge. You can see the numbers, how they're numbered. You guys will be one with all that. Okay, now, if we start in the mouth and we chew the food up, we form this thing called a bolus. Okay, so the bolus is going to pass into the pharynx, okay, and it starts at the oropharynx. It's going to go to the laryngopharynx, and then from the laryngopharynx, it's going to go to the esophagus. Okay, the esophagus is going to connect the pharynx to the stomach. Okay, the way that we swallow is a three-part process. Swallowing is called deglutition. Okay, so deglutition is swallowing. It has 3 stages. So it's got a voluntary stage, which occurs in the mouth when we're swallowing, then a pharyngeal stage as it passes through the pharynx, and then esophageal stage as it passes through the esophagus to enter into the stomach. Okay, so here's a sagittal cut through the head. So before we swallow, you can kind of see, like within the oropharynx. Let's see, let me try to find another color. Oh, look, sorry, that's new. Didn't know how to erase. No, I can't get rid of it. All right, let me try to get on here. All right, so if we look here, okay, so here's the uvula and the palate, okay, and then down here at the epiglottis, those are the main things that we want to look at. So if we look, when we go to swallow, what's going to happen is the uvula and the soft palate are going to rise up. Okay, so they're going to go up. Okay, and they're going to close off the oropharynx or the nasopharynx. They're going to close off the nasopharynx so that the food doesn't go up your nose. Okay, the epiglottis is going to close over the larynx so that the food can't go down into your trachea. So it's going to close that off so that doesn't happen. And then your tongue's going to push the food, is going to rise up and push the bolus back. Okay, so what's going to happen during the esophageal phase is the circular muscles are going to constrict, okay, and then they're going to relax, and then the longitudinal muscles will constrict. And it's kind of like a milking motion. So we're going to squeeze and push, and we're going to move the food down through the esophagus until we get to the stomach. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. Okay, this way it's wave-like movement. Okay, so the wave-like movement is called peristalsis. Okay, so peristalsis is the wave-like movement, and that's created by these circular muscles. Okay, when the food gets to the stomach, there's a sphincter that has to relax in order for the food to enter the stomach. That sphincter is either called the lower esophageal sphincter, or it's sometimes called the cardiac sphincter. So cardiac, so C-A-R-D-I-A-C. So cardiac sphincter, lower esophageal sphincter. If that's not working, that's how you get gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD. So GERD. I wonder if I can. GERD. So is gastroesophageal reflux disease. So that's when the food comes up because that sphincter is weakened. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to. This is a better program than what I was using. Hopefully this all works. Okay, now, when we get to the stomach, okay, the stomach's job, it connects the esophagus to the duodenum. Okay, now remember the duodenum is the first part of the small intestines. Okay, now in the stomach there are wrinkles, and the wrinkles are called rugae. Okay, it also has glands that release mucus. Okay, so the stomach is very acidic. So it has glands that are releasing hydrochloric acid. So while it's releasing hydrochloric acid, it has to also release the mucus so that it doesn't eat through itself. Okay, the stomach also releases an enzyme called pepsin, which is going to break down proteins. It releases a compound called intrinsic factor, and it also releases gastrin. Okay, it has 3 muscle layers. Okay, so 3 muscle layers. So that makes it a little bit different than the intestines and the esophagus, because they only have 2 muscle layers. The stomach has 3. Okay, now you can live without a stomach. Okay, stomach is not absolutely necessary. The only thing that the stomach does that's essential for life is this intrinsic factor. So it produces intrinsic factor, and the purpose of intrinsic factor is to help you absorb vitamin B. Okay, so intrinsic factor, is necessary to absorb vitamin B. Okay, now without the vitamin B, how can I move this? I can't move it. Okay, without the vitamin B, you can't make red blood cells. So you can't make red blood cells, you become anemic, and then you die. So people that, there, now I can move it. People that have, like a gastric bypass, they have a smaller stomach, and they don't have as much surface area. They don't make as much intrinsic factor. So what they end up doing is they have to get vitamin B shots, because the intrinsic factor binds to the vitamin B, and that's how it gets absorbed in your small intestines. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, now what's going to happen is the stomach's going to all those 3 muscle layers are going to mix up the food, and they break it up, and they mix it with the juices that are being secreted. Okay, so like the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin and the mucus, and they form this thing called chyme. Okay, so chyme. So chyme is that soupy mixture that's in your stomach. Okay, so chyme is what's going to go into your small intestines. Okay, there is a little bit of chemical digestion that occurs in your stomach. So we start breaking down proteins into smaller pieces of amino acids with pepsin. Okay, and you can always think of like Pepcid AC or Pepto-Bismol. Okay, so peptic ulcer, so all that stomach. Okay, now for the most part, your stomach doesn't absorb anything. Okay, so no absorbing's going on. So it's not absorbing. Here's like a pointer thing, but it doesn't seem to be. Look, let's see. Whoop, that's weird. Sorry. Okay, so cancel. Okay, I don't want to arrange anything. Sorry, guys. Hold on. Ugh, go away. Okay. So it doesn't absorb anything. It can absorb aspirin. It can absorb alcohol. It can absorb a little bit of short fatty acids, some ions, and water, but not a lot. Okay, so here's stomach. Okay, so we went over these in lab. The raised area is called the fundus. Okay, here comes the esophagus in. There's the cardiac region, or the cardia, the body. Okay, the pyloric sphincter, the pylorus. Okay, and then we're going into the duodenum. 3 layers of muscle again. Okay, here's just a cadaver stomach. Kind of see, I want you to see, like, there's the rugae. The rugae are the ridges in the mucosa, so it can expand. It can get bigger. Okay, here's a picture of if you took a cross-section through the stomach wall, and the basic things that I want you to see here is here's the mucosa. Okay, so that's the mucus. There's the submucosa. It's this blue layer. Okay, there's the muscle layer, and there's the serosa. Okay, so kind of see how it's all laid out. Okay, now the pancreas. Okay, so the pancreas, you have to remember, it has 2 functions. It's got endocrine and exocrine function. Okay, so for the endocrine system, you remember that it produces hormones. It releases insulin and glucagon. Okay, now it also has exocrine function, so it's going to release chemicals that are involved in digestion. Okay, so exocrine-wise, here's what it releases. It releases pancreatic amylase. Okay, it releases trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase. Okay, it releases pancreatic lipase, and then it releases 2 enzymes that will break down DNA and RNA, ribonuclease and deoxyribonuclease. Okay, so here's a picture of all the ducts. Here's pancreas. The main duct that comes from the pancreas is called the pancreatic duct. So it comes down like this. Okay, it's going to dump into the small intestines, and where it dumps in, it's going to dump in at the duodenum. And there's actually a name for that. There's a sphincter there, and it has a the hepatopancreatic sphincter. Okay, they used to call it the, oh shoot, I can't remember. There's an old name for it. Okay, now here's the gallbladder. Okay, so there's the liver. Okay, liver has a bunch of ducts. Okay, a right and a left hepatic duct. The liver is going to produce bile. Okay, and the bile is going to come down, and it gets backed up and saved in the gallbladder. Okay, so the liver makes bile, but the gallbladder stores and concentrates bile. So it's hanging on to it. Okay, when it's time, when you eat a greasy meal, the bile is going to be released from the gallbladder. Okay, it's going to travel down the cystic duct, and then it'll go into the common bile duct. Okay, and then the bile duct and the pancreatic duct come together, and they form this hepatopancreatic duct, and that dumps into the small intestines. Okay, so the liver has 2 lobes. Okay, right and left. The big one is actually subdivided, but we're not going to go into that much detail. Okay, the gallbladder, it's just a sac, and that's what cyst means, so it's a sac. Okay, it's under the liver, and its function is it stores and concentrates the bile. Okay, so there's cells of the liver are called hepatocytes. Okay, and in the liver there's these spaces called hepatic sinusoids. It has Kupffer cells, which we can talk about, and it's got this thing called the central vein. Okay, hepatocytes make bile. Okay, and they're going to carry the bile. There's ducts, and the ducts are going to carry the bile to the gallbladder. Okay, what the bile is going to do is it's going to emulsify the lipids. It's going to help us break them down. Okay, here's another list of all the different things that the liver does. Okay, so it functions in carbohydrate, lipid, and protein metabolism. It's going to help get rid of drugs and hormones. It's going to excrete bilirubin, makes bile salts, stores vitamins, minerals. It conducts phagocytosis, and it actually will activate vitamin D. So liver is actually very, very, very important. Okay, so here's the histology, or the microscopic structure of the liver. Okay, so I always think it kind of looks like a bicycle wheel, so it's kind of like this, and it goes out like that. So in the middle, right in here, that's called the central vein. Okay, and what's going to happen is the blood that's coming from the digestive organs. So if you think back to that hepatic portal system, so the blood is going to come from the digestive organs, and it's going to enter the liver. Okay, what it's going to do is it's going to flow through these liver sinusoids. It's going to be filtered through there. So the blue things are the sinusoids. Okay, so hepatic sinusoid are all the blue things. Okay, so the blood's going to flow through there, and it's going to get cleaned out. Okay, so these Kupffer cells, what they're doing, they're actually macrophages, and they're going to go through and they're going to gobble up junk that's in the blood. Okay, the hepatocytes are making bile. Okay, so the blood's flowing into the central vein. Okay, so the blood's going this way to the central vein, and then it'll go back to the hepatic vein and back to the inferior vena cava, if you think about this hepatic portal system. Okay, now the bile, though, bile's going the other direction. So the hepatocytes are making bile, and the bile is going this way. So let me see if I can get a green pen. Okay. Green. Okay, so the bile's going to go, oops, come on, this way. Okay. And then it's going to go in, it's going to either dump into the small intestines or into the gallbladder. Okay, so, all right, so maybe record. So, the small intestines. So, the main function of the small intestines is to break down and absorb the nutrients. Okay, so it's going to take the food that you eat, break it into monomers. Okay, and then we're gonna be able to absorb it and use it in our blood. Okay, so the definition of absorption, so it's the passage of nutrients from the food into the blood or the lymph. Okay, so it can occur by all those means of cell transport. Okay, so simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Okay, most things pass into the blood to the capillaries, so monosaccharides, amino acids, some little fatty acids go in. Everything just dumps right into the blood. Big fatty acids, though, okay, so long chain fatty acids and monoglycerides, they're actually absorbed into the lymph system. Okay, so they get turned into these things called micelles, and we can talk about that more in lecture. They get remade into triglycerides, and they get packaged into some little vesicles that are called chylomicrons, and then they go into this thing called a lacteal, and the lacteal is part of the lymphatic system. Okay, we can talk about that in more detail. It's kind of interesting to, maybe hard to understand. Okay, the small intestine it also absorbs water, electrolytes, and vitamins. Okay, so here's small intestines. Okay, so because it's doing all this absorbing and secreting, okay, so it's secreting enzymes that are going to break down your food, Okay, it has a lot of surface area, so it's really long. Okay, so they say about 18 feet long. Okay, really, really long. And if you look at it on the inside, okay, if you cut it up, you're going to see there's all these folds in here. Okay, so there's tons of circular folds, so it's increasing the surface area. So you have more space to absorb the food and to digest the food. Okay, now on those circular folds, okay, so here's the image of the circular folds. If you look at the circular folds, what you're going to find are all these little fingers. And the little fingers are actually called villus, or villi is plural. Okay, so those little fingers are going to be there, and it's just making tons and tons of surface area so that you can absorb the food as it's going through your small intestines. Okay, now, if you look, okay, here's the mucosa again. Okay, here's the villi. Okay, and then in the villi you can see blood vessels. Okay, so you see your blood vessels, and that green thing, that's the lacteal. That's the little lymph vessel. Okay, so amino acids, okay, sugars, simple sugars, they can get absorbed through here, and they're going to go straight into the capillaries. Okay, some things are too big, like big fatty acids, so they're going to get absorbed into these lacteals, which are lymph vessels, and they're bigger. Okay, so basically they're bigger so that they can transport something that's bigger. Okay, now we will talk about this, but here's a summary of all the digestive enzymes. Okay, so things that are amylase, okay, they're going to digest starches. Okay, so they break down carbohydrates. Okay, so there's salivary amylase, which is coming from your salivary glands, and pancreatic amylase, which comes from pancreas. Okay, there are some that are in your small intestines that are going to break down these sugars. These sugars are all considered disaccharides, so they have 2 rings, and those are going to be broken down into glucose, fructose, and galactose. And that's what can actually be absorbed through your bloodstream. Okay, there are enzymes that digest proteins. Okay, so pepsin, trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase, and then peptidases. Okay, so they're all functioning to break down proteins into amino acids so that you can absorb them. Okay, lipases. Okay, so there's one that's released in your mouth, lingual lipase, and then there's pancreatic lipase. And then we have nucleases. Okay, so here's how things are going to get absorbed. Okay, so glucose and galactose, they can be follow sodium, okay, with secondary active transport, and they're going to get absorbed. So this is supposed to be the cells in the mucosa of the small intestines. Okay, so here's the epithelial cells of the villus. The villus actually have microvilli on them. Okay, so I don't want you to memorize all this, but I want you to see that things are just going to move through, and there's different mechanisms to get them all through. Okay, some of them are going to be active transport, some of them are going to be facilitated diffusion, some of them can just diffuse through. So there's all sorts of different ways. Okay, so if you look, so the sugars, they'll go through, okay, amino acids, little short chains of amino acids can go through. Okay, short chains of fatty acids can go through. Okay, what's going to happen is they're going to go through the wall of the small intestines. Okay, and then they're going to go to the hepatic portal vein, and then they're going to go to the liver. The big fatty acids, they get packaged in a vesicle. The vesicle is called a chylomicron, and that's going to dump into the lymph. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Okay, so how the absorbed nutrients are going to move. Okay, so after they get through the liver, okay, they're going to be in the hepatic vein, and then they're going to travel up from the vein. Okay, so from the vein, they're going to dump into the inferior vena cava, and then they're going to go back to the heart, and then they're going to get oxygen, and then we're going to dump stuff out. Okay, the lymph is going to kind of do the same thing. Okay, so the lymph is going to go back towards the heart, and the lymph will actually dump back into the bloodstream at the subclavian veins. So that's how what's in the lymph gets back into the blood. Okay, so the large intestine. Okay, so large intestine, it starts at this thing called the ileocecal sphincter. Okay, and then it's going to go on to the anus. Okay, it has the cecum, it has the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal. Okay, it has mucosa in it. Its mucosa doesn't do as much secreting. It does a lot of absorbing. So the large intestine is going to absorb water so that like we don't have diarrhea or that we're not losing water. So it's like the last place to absorb water. There are globulate cells in the mucosa of this large intestine that are going to secrete mucus to help things keep moving along. Okay, when food moves through, or waste moves through the large intestines, it's called mass peristalsis. That's a strong movement, and that's going to drive like a bowel movement. In the large intestines, some substances are broken down, not a lot. Some vitamins are actually made because of the bacteria that live in your large intestines. We also are going to absorb water. Okay, so here's what I just said again. So absorbs water, electrolytes, vitamins. Okay, so your feces, what they're made out of is water, inorganic salts, okay, so no carbon in there, epithelial cells, okay, bacteria, okay, so there are a lot of bacteria that live in our gut, and then things that we can't digest, things that we can't break down. Okay, so when you poop, that's called defecation. Defecation, it's a reflex. Okay, so it's aided by when your diaphragm contracting and the abdominal muscles contracting. We have to relax the external anal sphincter in order for the feces to come out. Okay, so here's a picture of the large intestines. Okay, so here's the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestines. Okay, so it joins up here. Okay, the blind pouch, remember, is called the cecum. So there's the cecum. There's a little sphincter that attaches the ileum and the cecum, which is the ileocecal sphincter. Okay, so here's the appendix, which hangs off the cecum. Okay, the pouches are called haustra. Each one is a haustrum. Okay, there is a band of muscle, smooth muscle, that's called the tinea coli. Okay, the three parts of the large intestine, so we have ascending colon, transverse colon, and then the descending colon. Okay, and it's going to end up with the sigmoid colon, which they always say it looks like an S, but I don't see it. Okay, and then the rectum, and then the anus is at the end. Okay, so the haustra are the pouches. That band is the tinea coli. Ascending, transverse, descending. Okay, and then if you look at the rectum, okay, so here's the rectum. It's like the last stop before you get to the anus. Okay, so then you'll have the anal canal. Okay, 2 layers of muscle, 2 muscles. So the internal sphincter, okay, and then the external sphincter right here. Okay, so internal is going to be involuntary whenever it's stretched. Rectum stretched, it's going to tell this to relax. Okay, and then after that relaxes, then it'll go to your brain. Your brain, you'll say, is it time, is it the place? And then if you relax this, then you have a bowel movement. Okay, there are little canals in here, and that's mucus is excreted to keep things moving along. Okay, blood vessels, what happens if the blood vessels get stretched here? That's when you get hemorrhoids. Okay, here's a cross-section through the layers of the large intestines. So not as many villi or microvilli, and no folds, no circular folds. So we have the mucosa. Okay, there's glands. Okay, submucosa, muscularis, so just 2 layers, and then the serosa is the outer layer. Okay, so phases of digestion. So if you think about digesting food, Okay, it happens in 3 steps. Okay, so cephalic phase. So cephalic phase is really when you're thinking about eating food. So it's all in your head. Okay, so when you're starting to think about food, the salivary glands start secreting saliva, the gastric glands start secreting gastric juice, things start moving around. Okay, so after you eat the food, it hits the stomach, and that leads to the gastric phase of digestion. So more gastric juices are released, and the stomach's moving around even more. Okay, now the last phase is the intestinal phase. Okay, so food's going to start leaving the stomach slowly and entering the small intestines. Okay, and there are actually hormones that regulate all that. Okay, so the hormones that regulate it are gastrin, secretin, and cholecystokinin, or CCK. Okay, so gastrin comes from the stomach, and it's kind of cool. When the stomach stretches, okay, it's going to cause the stomach to move, and it's going to relax the pyloric sphincter so that the food can start to leave the stomach and get into the small intestines. Okay, secretin, what it's going to do, okay, it comes from the intestines. It's going to tell the pancreas to start releasing its secretions. Okay, now cholecystokinin, okay, comes from the small intestines. Okay, and here's what it does. So it stops the stomach from emptying, so it slows it down. Okay, it causes us to release pancreatic juice, okay, release bile, and starts to tell you, oh yeah, I feel full, I'm good. Okay, so what happens when we get old? So when we get old, we don't have as many secretions, things don't move around as much, the muscles don't work as well. Okay, so we could lose loss of taste. Okay, so you wouldn't have taste, you wouldn't be able to tell what the food tastes like. You might have muscle weaknesses, which is hernias. Could have a peptic ulcer. Okay, so that's when the lining of the stomach starts to erode. Constipation, okay, because you're not moving around. You might be taking drugs that slow down digestion. Okay, hemorrhoids. Okay, and diverticulitis. That's when you get pouches in your small intestines, and the large intestines. Well, wait a minute. I think it's large intestines. So you get pouches in there, and then the food can get stuck in those pouches. All right, so here's about dietary fiber. So dietary fiber is fiber that we can't digest. Okay, so it's things like cellulose, lignin, pectin. Okay, so insoluble fiber doesn't dissolve in water. Okay, and it passes through the GI tract and speeds things up. Okay, soluble fiber does dissolve in water. Okay, so it forms a gel that slows the passage. So it's found in beans, oats, barley, broccoli. It says it slows the passage of material. Okay, so you kind of have to balance those two. Colorectal cancer. Okay, that's the deadliest of cancers. So it can be inherited. Alcohol, high animal fat, high protein increase the risk of colorectal cancer. Fiber, retinoids, calcium, selenium might help. Okay, so colon and rectal cancer symptoms can include diarrhea, constipation, cramping, pain, rectal bleeding. So they'll look for blood in the feces to screen for it. They'll do a colonoscopy or a sigmoidoscopy. Might use a barium enema so that they can see things more clearly. That's the end.